Hello, and welcome to Inside Cancer Careers, a podcast from the National Cancer Institute. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler. I work at the NCI in the Center for Cancer Training. On Inside Cancer Careers, we explore all the different ways that people join the fight against disease and hear their stories. In this episode, we're talking to Dr. Simon Schwörer, who recently started his lab at the University of Chicago, and to Matthew Lockhart, Director of the Loan Repayment Program at the National Institutes of Health, who is joined by two recent participants in that program, Dr. Deonna Williams and Dr. Arnithia Sutton. Listen to the end to hear some interesting recommendations and where we invite you to take your turn. Welcome Dr. Simon Schwörer to the podcast. He's an assistant professor of medicine at the University of Chicago in hematology-oncology and focuses his research on the interaction between cancer cells and associated fibroblasts and how they interact, with the goal of finding metabolic pathways that can be targeted for therapy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Oliver. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd like to know more about how you chose your path, both in terms of where you trained and also why you wanted to become a scientist and why you chose the area of cancer biology that you're working in.
Yeah, so becoming a scientist was really based on my interest of just understanding how things work all the time, always asking why, never being satisfied, it's just how it is. I always wanted to understand, even on a smaller scale level, molecular level, how do things work? Why do we get sick? So that's why I really want to become a researcher, trying to understand causes of disease. That's kind of what motivated me to, study science. Regarding my path, so I studied molecular medicine at Ulm University with the goal of becoming a researcher. And I guess the trajectory from there was a combination of, my own interest and love for science, but also to some extent, serendipity. Just kind of things just came together in a good way for me to some extent. I just finished my bachelor thesis. I was working for a few months in the lab that studies neuroregeneration. I was really open-minded at the time, really interested in anything. And then I started my master's thesis, which is a thing that people normally do in Europe before they do their PhD training. And it became clear to me that I needed a bit more, or wanted to have more training in research, like in learning more methods and just becoming more exposed. So I applied to several positions as a research assistant, eventually obtained one in a lab that studied stem cell aging that was still at Ulm University in Germany. But my main job was genotyping of mice. But, of course, I was not satisfied with that. I wanted to do more and more and spend a lot of time in the lab. And the postdoc that mentored me, or who I worked for at the time, was really supportive and, even trying to teach me more methods and gave me more insight in his work. And I was able to participate in lab meetings. And so I got really excited about the research in the lab back then. And the research was in the lab of Dr. Karl Lennart Rudolph at Ulm University back then. And eventually I decided to do my master thesis in there, spent half a year every day in the lab, and it was really a lot of fun. And my topic was to understand molecular mechanisms of stem cell dysfunction in aging. So majorly focusing on muscle stem cells, with the idea being that stem cell dysfunction is a cause for the inability of the elderly to regenerate muscle tissue. So I did this work on stem cell dysfunction and regeneration, and that was really exciting. And we had some very interesting findings. And at the time, that's where the first, serendipity comes into play. The head of the lab also was offered a position as a director of a Leibniz Institute in Germany, Leibniz Institute on Aging, and that was in the east of Germany, in Jena. And he offered me a position as a PhD student. And because I was so in love with what I'm doing, I really liked it. I didn't hesitate, and I accepted this position. So I moved back in 2013 to Jena and started my PhD work there.
So Simon, you mentioned a couple of times that you loved your work. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is it that you love? Do you love the actual doing of it, the intellectual elements?
Yeah.
Tell us more.
It was all of it. So it was both, still at this young stage of my career, learning a lot of new things, learning new methods, but also, having some interesting findings that you trying to understand, come up with an experiment to address these things. So it was both like intellectual aspect and just having interesting results that we didn't understand at the time, and provoking us to ask more questions and getting a deeper understanding. So it was really just a lot of joy for me spending long hours in the lab, and it's really great. So it really was clear for me at the time that this is what I wanted to do going forward, and it was an easy decision for me doing a PhD because I knew exactly this is what I wanted to do. That makes sense.
Yeah. So you did that PhD at Jena at the Leibniz Institute?
Exactly. At the Leibniz Institute on Aging in Jena. So I started there in 2013, and my topic was building up to some extent on the master thesis work that I did. And at the end, we had some very interesting findings on a specific gene or gene signature being upregulated in old muscle stem cells. And I further explored this in a mouse model, and we tried to see if we can prevent this accumulation of this gene product. Can we potentially, reverse stem cell dysfunction? That's exactly what we found. And furthermore, building up on these findings, what are the causes of upregulation of this gene signature? And in the end, we ended up defining what we called at the time an epigenetic stress response. So basically, we found that muscle stem cells show a very particular change in their epigenome after stress, with stress being, for example, an injury to the muscle tissue. And that response is very different in the old stem cells. And that was our big finding at the time. And from there on, I, of course, wanted to explore. So why is that? Why do we see this dysregulation of the epigenome? And at the same time, there were several studies coming out, specifically in the cancer metabolism world, that there's a strong connection between the epigenome and metabolism. So metabolism regulates the epigenome. Based on this and my reading and my interest, I was really convinced almost that some metabolic changes have to be the cause of these findings that we had. And so I realized this is the next step in my career. I need to know more about metabolism because I need to come to the root cause of this defect that we observed. It was clear to me that I would definitely have to go to metabolism lab to really get deep training in metabolism and not just go to a stem cell lab that potentially has a metabolism project. So I really wanted to get this deep understanding of this, again, with the idea of potentially applying it to my stem cell dysfunction and aging system.
So that informed your search for a postdoc lab?
Exactly. That has informed my search for a postdoc lab. I really wanted to go to a lab in the end that does metabolism work. And then I luckily ended up in the lab of Craig Thompson at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. So he offered me a position in his lab after I interviewed there, and I moved then to New York in October 2017 and then started my work there.
So that must have been a change from Jena to New York?
It was a big change for me, quite so. So I even more so because I come from a very small village in Germany, which is a few thousand inhabitants. So it was a big change, but over the course of my career and being in Ulm and Jena, like smaller cities in Germany, I really enjoyed more the city life. I mean, it was not as big city, of course, as New York, but that gave me the opportunity to really enjoy it even more so in New York. I mean, all the things that are offered in such a big city was really great. In addition to the science, of course, that was really great at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. So there was a big change, but yeah, for the good in the end.
Fantastic. And then you completed your postdoc with Dr. Thompson and then moved on to the next part of the career, which I think is one of the most probably exciting and stressful. Was it stressful for you looking for your faculty position?
It was stressful. So let me just mention, I think it complete the circle a little bit, how I ended up with, what I'm doing now. I think there's one small thing to share about this, which is I came to Craig Thompson's lab, again, still had the idea of metabolism and stem cells, which he even did at the time. But when I started, it was more like, yeah, we're not working on this anymore, Simon. So I kind of had to come up with, okay, what am I doing now in this lab? I was really never exposed in my research career on cancer. The lab really studied cancer metabolism. And so I realized I'm probably not a good cancer biologist, but maybe I'll start working on the normal cells in the tumor microenvironment. So that's how I ended up working on cancer-associated fibroblasts. And at the time, people published work on how that these cells can even release metabolites to support the survival or growth of cancer cells in the tumor. But it was not really known how, these cells actually work themselves. Like how can they support their own function? It's known that cancer cells rewire their metabolism to support proliferation, but how fibroblasts in the tumor do that hasn't been really known. And that's really the problem that I started to tackle as a postdoc, and that eventually then helped me to get to this point of having a successful postdoc and being able to compete for faculty positions.
Fascinating. And because, I think it represents a recognition of a tumor as more than just a bunch of cancer cells, right? We've learned about blood vessels and so on, and now we're learning through your work and that of others that these other, quote, normal cells are being recruited into the community of the tumor, and their behavior is changing in a way that's important. So it's fascinating. And interesting that you came out of a non-cancer background and found that niche for yourself, just like the cancer fibroblasts, associated fibroblasts have their niche. You kind of came in and now you're doing great stuff. So tell us about the hunt for the assistant professorship.
Yeah, so the hunt started probably in summer 2021. So we are just not trying to wrap up our second story of my postdoc work, and we just got actually reviews back of a paper that we're sending out, and I was sitting with my mentor Craig Thompson in his office, and we were talking about, of course, the experiments we're doing and what we have to do to address all the reviewers' comments. But then he also, after the conversation, asked me, "Oh, Simon, when are you starting to apply?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I wasn't sure if I should apply this year." And he's like, "Yeah, you should definitely apply. Your paper is coming out, hopefully." And so that really motivated me to, okay, this is actually really good timing for me. I knew I wanted to obtain a faculty position, but I wasn't sure that I could already apply at this time. And so that sparkled it all. And then, while doing all the experiments to revise our manuscript, I also, tried to think, okay, what is there beyond this, and trying to develop my own research program over the course of that summer, 2021. And then probably September, started to submit my first applications to positions that were posted online.
And how many positions, if I may ask, did you apply for?
I applied for 22 positions in the end. So I guess there was a recent study, and I think that described this process, and I think that's more like average what people do nowadays, about 20-ish. Some people do more, some people do less, but I felt at least at the time comfortable with the number of applications that I send out. That potentially, if I don't get anything at this moment, I would still have another chance, maybe the year later.
Right. And the position at the University of Chicago, tell us a little bit more about why you picked that particular place.
Yeah, so in the end, what made me choose this is one main thing was at the University of Chicago, they really were building up a new center for cancer metabolism that is really focused on all aspects of metabolism that are related to cancer. And they recruited recently another person just a year earlier who was focused on a metabolic flux analysis in vivo in tumors and even in patients. And now they were interested in someone in the tumor who was interested in the tumor microenvironment. And that really, I think, was a great fit I was a good fit for them, but also they were a great fit for what I was looking for. I really wanted to be in an environment where I'm not the only one who's doing metabolism research, but really have a community where I could discuss my ideas, but also have the resources available to do the research that I'm doing. So that was a big driver of me. And of course, then also during the interview process, the discussions, other faculty in the search committee, but also in the entire department and section, they were really all positive. And so that was, I guess, one of the major aspects. And being then able to be part of this new program and even help develop and shape this program. So even at this early stage, kind of being influential about where this program in cancer metabolism goes. So that was really one of the biggest factors and driving my decision to come to the University of Chicago.
Sounds fantastic. Sounds like a great environment, lots of colleagues and interest in the area. So you set up your lab towards the end of last year, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so tell us about that. What was it like to move to another city, come into an empty space and start imagining your own research lab in that space?
Yeah, so it was not that much of a shock. Like it's often reported, when you scout the internet, that you come there, people open the door of your office and say, "Oh, this is it. This is your office. There you go. This is your lab." So I had a lot of support early on, and in our section and department, and everybody was trying to help me set up lab, set up the office. People were looking after me. That it was really good. And again, I got a lot of help initially, even now still, from the other person they recruited the year before me from the same program. So shout out to my neighbor and friend Brandon for his help in getting me started. And yeah, so I kind of had a lab that was built from scratch next to me. So I kind of took that a lot of as inspiration. But of course, also the pictures of how my former lab and labs looked like. And of course, my own idea, what did I like and did I not like about how these other labs were set up? What do I want to have different if I can create my own lab? So that was a super exciting time just to really build up the lab in a way that I like. So that was really a lot of fun. And it took a lot of time to research all the equipment, consumables, reagents to get. But once they were in, it was really a lot of fun. Especially the month of December, I kind of waited with unpacking a lot of the boxes, and then took the month of December kind of as a almost like dealt with the boxes as like Christmas presents, and opened them, and it was a lot of fun. And then rearranging things every day, and then just before the holidays, we had the lab set up, and I got all my major most of my major equipment in. So yeah, then I left for holiday break with a very great feeling that the lab is set up, and starting January 2nd, we could really do something in there. Yeah, so that was a great feeling. Yeah,
that sounds fantastic. Yeah, congratulations. But I do wonder, what was the hardest part of taking that step towards independence?
So I think two answers to that in terms of the job hunt. So what was, maybe that might be interesting to your listeners, what was hard for me in the beginning to actually communicate my science in those initial interviews. There were a lot of screening interviews involved, and I think I did poorly in those. And I think the problem was that I just often wasn't concise enough, couldn't bring my message, and also why my work matters, why is it important to the point. And I think in those 20-30 minute phone calls, I didn't do my best job. But then later, I learned through the process, and communication with other lab members and other people, who are also in this, helped, to refine, those answers from my side, and and of course the experience that I had myself. So that was the one part, and then the other part about what is challenging in terms of being independent now. I think the most challenging thing is now really needing to take care of everything yourself. So, and that has, of course, its great sides, like really being able to develop your own ideas and just doing what you are interested in. At least now, that's awesome. At the same time, I have to get all the things organized in the background so we can actually do those cool things that I'm interested in. That starts with all the biosafety and animal protocols. That starts with a lot of other administrative tasks that I have to do, that were just always taken care of and in the background, and to some extent didn't even know I needed to do these kind of things that I now have to do. So I wouldn't say it was a shock. There's more work to it than I thought there would be.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, there are those chores, right? I mean, it's not, unfortunately, science. Like any job, you have to keep certain things running. Simon, we met on Twitter, and I remember you were posting about a grant that you got very soon after you made this transition. And I know that you were part of the NCI's K99R00 program. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that grant and then the new one that you got and what that was like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was lucky, or I was happy, to obtain the K99 from the NCI. I was awarded in April 2021. Writing the grant back then was a good experience because I was able to write it during the lockdown in 2020. So that kind of helped me to keep it together, I guess, writing this grant. And then, afterwards the work we did and then we later published in the end of 2021 was based on this grant. It was really a good experience and really helped me to, I guess, build up the foundation of the research program that I'm working on now. So that was a great experience. And transition to the R00 phase, and I think I mentioned this to you on Twitter, took I think a bit longer than I would have imagined. And so I started to work on the R00 transition in summer 2021, just 1 or 2 months after I obtained my faculty position. And so writing that was, interesting experience. Again, helped me shape my ideas, what I'm actually doing in my own lab. And I got a lot of good support from the University of Chicago, even though I wasn't there yet, from the administration side, from the grants management office. That was really a lot of support there. And it took, maybe it was the end of the one fiscal year, start the other fiscal year that it took so long, but I eventually obtained the R00 in mid-January. So I'm really relieved to have the support. But now the other grant, so I just mentioned I wrote the R00 in summer 2021, and we submitted it in July. So I was kind of in grant writing mode at the time, and I was of course researching what else is out there, what could be some grants that I could apply once I transitioned to my faculty position. And at the time, and still, my research is now focusing a lot on pancreatic cancer, and I found an opportunity from the Hirschberg Foundation for Pancreatic Cancer Research. And, it turned out they had one cycle every year in mid-August. That was, of course, before I started my new position. And I was in the grant writing mode. So I thought, okay, why not? I have so many ideas. So I, just after finishing my R00, I took, some more time and developed this proposal. And again, it was very helpful in shaping the ideas. I mean, I put, of course, a lot of ideas out there when I interviewed for the position, but actually really planning the entire research and planning the entire program in this proposal was also very helpful. So I said, even if I don't obtain this award, it was a good experience because I really know now what we should do to get from A to Z. And I told myself, even if I don't get it, it's a good experience and I have nothing to lose. So why not doing it? And because no one expects me to get a grant, even before I start my position. And it looked like that the proposal I wrote was good enough. And I was lucky to obtain this grant early on. So I really appreciate the support of the Hirschberg Foundation for such a early career and investigator like myself who just started out. So really appreciate that.
Well, congratulations. That's fantastic. It sounds like you're off to a running start. One last question. Now that you are the head of the group, what are you telling or what are you planning on telling the grad students and postdocs that will be part of your team?
So I would speak, of course, a lot about my own experience and, what helped me to get to the point where I'm now. Of course, always saying that my experience might not be, exactly what your experience will be, or my position is not the same that your position is. But, that being said, what I always tell people who, are interested in joining my lab now that, what I'm really looking for, and I think what you should be if you want to be in this environment is really be just excited about science in general, kind of having this love for science and that drive so much of your motivation to kind of show up every day and go deeper. And even if a lot of things fail, experiments fail, job applications fail, that still keeps you going. And I think at least that has been my experience, that at some point this is always going to be rewarded, just being with, coming to the boss of what it really is that is driving what you observe, obtaining a faculty position or other positions. Even if the first time doesn't work, just don't give up. And I have some, even personal experience to share in this. So I had some failures in of course, my science, but I guess one personal failure that was when I participated in the New York City Marathon in 2018. And I ran marathons before, and I was motivated to do a new personal best. And I was on track of that until I fainted 1 mile before the finish line. And I couldn't finish the race just 1 mile before the finish line. And I was so down for so many days and weeks afterwards. But I stood up again and I was able to qualify for the year after. And I just did it all over again, learning from my mistakes that I did. And then I made it. And it wasn't my personal best, but it was still, I made it. And sometimes it's also just good to make it. You don't have necessarily have to be the best, but just even making it and, overcoming things where you failed before has been a good lesson also on a personal level. So kind of being dedicated, being excited about what you're doing, not that yourself, bring down, even if people tell you so. That is something I would share.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Schwerer, for that. Very inspirational, and thanks for sharing your most recent steps of your career. And we wish you all the best success in the future, exciting research, and that you continue to share your passion and enjoyment for science with us and with the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's take a quick break to alert our listeners to an upcoming opportunity. In April, we will be at the annual meeting of the American Association for Cancer Research, AACR, in Orlando to share about how NCI supports cancer research training. With me today are two colleagues who can tell us more. First, Erica Ginsberg, Director of the Office of Training and Education. Erica, what will you be talking about at our AACR session?
Well, NCI is known primarily for funding cancer research across the nation, but there are also numerous fellowships available to conduct basic, clinical, or genomic and population-based research at one of the 3 NCI campuses in Maryland. My team and I help take care of our trainees on these campuses. At AACR, you will hear about training opportunities, as well as some of the career exploration and professional development resources provided to trainees within the intramural research program.
That sounds great, Erica. Thank you. Let's turn to Naz Zahir, the Director of the Cancer Training Branch. Naz, what will you be sharing in the session?
I will be at AACR with several colleagues from the branch. My group will have informative presentations on NCI funding opportunities, including fellowships and career development awards, and they will share tips for preparing strong applications. I will be providing an overview of the session and serve as the session moderator.
Sounds fantastically helpful to people thinking of submitting grants. Thank you. All 3 of us will be at the NCI booth in the exhibit hall from time to time. So come to our session where you can listen and ask questions, and come to the booth and find out more there. We look forward to seeing you all in Orlando in April. Now, back to the podcast. At Inside Cancer Careers, we're interested in how people make challenging cancer careers work. It's important to support people who are engaged in academic biomedicine because their research contributes to advances against disease. Many people know that the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, give out a lot of competitive research grants. Perhaps less well known is a program that we're talking about today, with Matthew Lockhart, Director of the Division of Loan Repayment at the NIH. Matthew is speaking with us with the help of an American Sign Language interpreter. Welcome, Matthew.
And thank you. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
So I thought the NIH gave research grants, Matthew, but what is this about loan repayment?
Loan repayments is a separate committee-mandated program that encourages and gives incentives to scientists who want to pursue research through career in academia. And we do that by paying the student loans and up to $50,000 for a 2-year commitment for research.
So the mission of the LRP is to help people stay in academic medicine. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. In any nonprofit setting, we don't want to be losing researchers to the industry who offer a higher salary and better incentives. So how we compete with that is by offering the loan repayment program as an option to keep them to stay in academia.
When was the program started?
Okay, so it's a little bit of a long history, so we started back in the 80s in the extramural research programs, like as we know it now, is more than 20 years old.
So how many awards does the LRP typically make in a given year?
I think roughly around about 1,300 awards. I should mention that we do have different subcommittees under the extramural program. We have 6 currently subcategories: clinical research, pediatric research, health disparities, clinical research for individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds, and contraception and infertility research. And then the 6th is the newest, and then the newest subcommittee is REACH, research in emerging areas that are critical to human health. And that's REACH for short. So those 6 are all, within those 6, it's about a total of about 1,300 yearly.
You mentioned the size of the awards. Are they for multiple years?
Yes. So yeah, good. That's a good question. So all the new awards are 2 years, and then and they can possibly be renewed for 1 or 2 years. There's no limit to the number of renewal awards, and as long as the applicant maintains the eligibility criteria, and then they can apply for that renewals until their education debt is paid off in full.
What's the chance of success? How many people of the people who apply obtain the awards?
Historically, we say about 50%. We have a 50% success rate, but in recent years, that has gone up a bit. Maybe we're closer to 55 or 60%. And we have a good success rate. With the renewals, the success rate is higher, and that's around 75 to 80%.
So what kind of individuals does the LRP typically go to? What are the requirements for an application?
So the eligibility criteria, right? We have 5 basic eligibility criteria that you have to meet. First is you have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident or naturalized U.S. citizen. You have to have your doctorate level degree or equivalent. And we do have some exceptions to that rule. For example, contraception and infertility research program, that category does not require doctorate level degree. And there are some REACH programs and some of the ICs don't require doctorate level degree. Required a commitment to research for average of 20 hours per week. You have to have a debt that is equivalent or above 20% of your annual income. And the research has to be at a nonprofit institute.
I understand that there are some myths that you commonly hear about the LRP program. I wonder what the most common ones are and what the real story is.
Yeah. So I'm laughing because, there are many myths out there, and I can't cover them all. A lot of people think that they have to come to NIH to do the research here and to be eligible to be qualified for that. And that's not the case. Another one would be, I think they have to come up with some new research and projects separate from what they're already doing. And that's not the case as well. You can use existing research that's already been approved. For example, if you have a K award or T32 or F30 or even R01, if you already have that grant approved, you can use that to qualify for the LRP. You don't have to come up with something new research programs for the purposes of applying for that program.
That's interesting because usually in NIH grants there's strict rules around overlap, but you're saying that LRP is not subject to that.
That's right, because we're not funding research activity per se. We're just paying down the scientist's or the loan debt.
Right, you're helping people stay in academic medicine rather than funding their research directly.
That's correct.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Matthew. I'd like to turn now to our other guests. We have with us today Dr. Deonna Williams, an assistant professor of molecular and comparative pathobiology at Johns Hopkins, and Dr. Arnithia Sutton, assistant professor of kinesiology and health sciences at Virginia Commonwealth University. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Dr. Williams, I understand that you are an ambassador for the LRP program. Could you tell us what an ambassador does in this program?
Yes, the ambassadors, I think, are really important kind of points of contact for the LRP, particularly people who are interested in applying. That's most of the people that I interact with. They're stationed throughout the whole country, and you can look this up. It's on the website. And people reach out to me to get help with their applications from the very, very beginning stages, thinking up ideas, to seeing if they're eligible for certain criteria. Should they go for clinical or health disparities, that kind of thing? To really the nitty gritty of what loans are eligible. And if I consolidate, does that discount me? Or, what should I do to prepare the award? Or I'm coming up for renewal. What did you do to become, successful in getting your renewals? So it really runs the gamut of people contacting me for inquiries. People at my home institution of Hopkins have come up to me, but there are people who I don't even know, just who've emailed me from across the country. And I've even had people on social media say, hey, I saw your Twitter. I saw you tweet about LRP. Do you want to talk about it with me? And I'm always happy to do that. So really my job is to help educate and bring awareness of the LRPs and ultimately help people receive it successfully. I even have put on seminars at my home institution as well, just info sessions for people to be able to get more information about it.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sutton, I wonder, you participated in the LRP program. Can you tell us a little bit about how that worked and what the impact was on your career?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to get an LRP. I believe the first one I got was in 2018, and that was as a postdoc. And I am currently still funded under it. So I had a 2-year award start out, and then I've had 2 one-year awards. And I am patiently awaiting to hear about my most recent application for a renewal. But it's definitely been like a burden lifted. It's just like, Matt was talking about, they handle your student loans. And so definitely as a postdoc, even as a junior faculty, knowing that you don't have to worry about how am I going to pay off my loans? What kind of side hustles do I need to do to pay off my loans? Like you can focus on your research and know that that part is taken care of. It's been a tremendous blessing.
So you applied right in while you were still in postdoc.
I did. I started my postdoc in 2017, and that's when I first learned about it. And I underestimated that application. So I found out about it and I said, oh yeah, I'll apply for this. And September applications opened up and I said, oh, I got time. And before I knew it, applications closed and I did not have an application in. And so knowing what the application process took, I went in 2018 and was successfully funded the following year.
How did you hear about the program?
I heard it's old school. I saw a flyer around our department and then I asked my PI about it and she knew about it and gave me more information. But that was prior to, I don't even think I saw much on Twitter and I was pretty active on Twitter. Now that's not the case because you see a large LRP Twitter presence now. But back then it was just a flyer hanging around.
Well, thank you. Dr. Williams, you've also participated in the program in addition to being an ambassador. I wonder if you could tell us how it impacted your career.
Yeah, so I applied. I got my first award in 2015. So I began my postdoc in 2014 in September, right when it was opening. And when I interviewed for the postdoc, I asked my mentor, I said, okay, I'm going to be applying for this thing. Are you okay with that? I hope you know. And she said, sure, support me. And I submitted it for November and I got out on the first try, very, very thankfully. I've renewed since then. 1 year I did not get the renewal. And I was like, oh no, should I reapply? But I did. And I got them subsequently. And my loans were just paid off this last summer. So it's been incredibly life-changing. At that time, postdoc salaries were much lower than they are now. So I only made, I think, like $41,000. I had a lot of extenuating life circumstances and younger siblings to take care of on that postdoc salary. So it was just not affordable. And it really came to the point where I had to tell my PI, like, I can't afford to stay here. I just can't pay my bills. Like, I want to do this, but I'm not able to. And so LRP was been just a huge burden lifted because that was $500 in my pocket each month, right? That I didn't have to pay after the very, very first payment. So it's been outstanding for my life. It's also been really helpful for my career as well and helping me stay competitive in academia. My LRP proposal was not funded. It was kind of like my side project. And it let my mentor kind of help me get dedicated time to work on this thing that was unique to her. And that became the basis for my K award that I got. And then that K award became the basis for my R01 that I got. So it really stemmed from the LRP and being able to work on this thing that I was really interested in, but I didn't have training in, and my mentor was not working on it. And of course, she didn't have funds for that project either. But I think it helped her see like, oh, this is something that's important. It's fundable by the NIH. Yes, you can have this time to work on this unique project.
That's fantastic. It's so good to hear that the LRP and then the K award and the R award, that's how we try to support our scientists, investigators. So that's fantastic. Dr. Sutton, I wonder if you were speaking to someone who's thinking about applying for LRP, what advice would you be giving them?
The first thing I would say is read that application guide from cover to cover. I think no matter how many times I've applied, I print it out and I read it. It's just like any grant. So, you might think you know it one time and the next time something will change. And especially with some of the new like institutes and like categories they have. So it's worth reading it. The other thing I would highly suggest is, if you're on social media, if you even type in LRP, you'll find a ton of people who have it. You'll find individuals who work for NIH who are willing to engage you about what it's like, what the process is like, help dispel some of those myths. So I highly recommend that. And then similar to what Dr. Williams says, I consider myself, I guess, a more unofficial ambassador, but people have reached out to me all the time on social media about the LRP process, if I'm willing to get on a Zoom and talk about it, talk about some of my materials, and I'm always welcome to do that, and I'm sure others are too.
Dr. Williams, you're an ambassador, you're giving advice all the time. What would you add to what Dr. Sutton's already shared with us?
I will totally second reading the instructions, because since I first applied to my last renewal, the application process and the website changed substantially. So read the rules. I would say become really well versed with the website. There are so many nuggets and gems on there that people don't realize, like success rates for different institutes. If you're thinking about my work could be, between these two, well, what's the success rate? Be strategic. Think about and kind of shop around where your grant or your proposal might best fit. And I'd say the other one would be to go for it and not feel like, well, I'm only a brand new postdoc, or, well, if I can, be persistent and wait till I get to become faculty to apply. No, just apply right away. There's no reason to wait. And another thing I would say was, I had some people who didn't understand LRP give me well-intentioned but not good advice. And they told me not to apply because they didn't give funds for your research and that it wouldn't be quote unquote counted as like a research grant. And it is true. It is a contract. It is not a grant, but it's reviewed by NIH-funded investigators who got LRP very likely, right? And it's prestigious and it can still go on your CV. And so there are merits to it. It also helps to give you confidence that this is fundable by the NIH and that people think it's worth funding. So I would say don't be discouraged just because it doesn't come with research funds.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. Let me turn back to you, Matthew, please. What advice do you give to people about the application process?
Yeah. So first piece of advice I would give to most applicants, and I do say this all the time, is you really have to talk with a program officer before you apply. The LRP has 24 different institute centers that participate in this program. Each one of them, the IC, has their own missions and research priorities. And sometimes the applicant will have some research that might fit more than one institute center. So I encourage them to talk to the program officers at each institute to really figure out which ones are a good match before you submit your application. So we do have a list of program officers on our website with their name and their contact information, emails, and stuff like that. So, and I always encourage the applicant to talk with them, the program officers, first.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for joining us today to talk about LRP. As always, we have lots of links and information on our show notes, so people can click through to the LRP website, and also Dr. Sutton and Dr. Williams' pages on their respective universities. And I'm sure there's ways to contact them, and also on social media. So thank you very much to our guests.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you again. It's been great being here.
And thank you. Yes.
Now it's time for a segment we call Your Turn, because it's a chance for our listeners to send in a recommendation that they would like to share. If you're listening, then you're invited to take your turn. Send us a tip for a book, a video, a podcast, or a talk that you found inspirational or amusing or interesting. You can send these to us at ncicc@nih.gov. Record a voice memo and send it along. We may just play it in an upcoming episode. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Schwörer to take his turn.
Thank you. Can I also share multiple things?
Of course, please.
Yes, great. So I got an immediate recommendation that is tangible. I loved reading recently the book Getting Things Done. A lot of people know about it. That was recommended to me by another recent new PI, and it just helped me, getting my time management in place and getting things a bit better organized. Although I learned that I did already many things that were suggested, but you can always improve. So that was a good recommendation. And then I think what I can also recommend is we talked earlier about academic career and recommendations there. Have some good hobbies and recommendation and things to do outside the lab. Have a pet. I have a cat. I love my cat. I always forget about anything else when I cuddle and play with her. So it's great having, hobbies like running. That's what I do. Cooking helps me calm down after a long day at work. Just have some fun outside the lab as well.
Thank you for that. That's, I think I can only agree with that. Thank you. I'd like to make a recommendation as well. It's a podcast, the Cancer History Podcast. It's part of the Cancer History Project, itself an interesting resource documenting the fight against cancer since the 1970s. In the February 3rd episode of the podcast, Dr. Otis Brawley, a Bloomberg Distinguished Professor at Johns Hopkins, holds a conversation with Dr. Robert Wynn, the director of the Massey Cancer Center at Virginia Commonwealth University. They're talking about the killing of Tyree Nichols and the power dynamics in policing and healthcare. A compelling listen from two leaders in cancer who have generously shared their own experiences regarding race and hold a frank conversation on where we are and where we need to go. That's all we have time for on today's episode of Inside Cancer Careers. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our guests. We want to hear from you. Your stories, your ideas, and your feedback are always welcome. And you're invited to take your turn to make a recommendation that we can share with our listeners. You can reach us at ncicc@nih.gov. Inside Cancer Careers is a collaboration between NCI's Office of Communications and Public Liaison and the Center for Cancer Training. It is produced by Angela Jones and Astrid Masfar. A special thanks to Lakshmi Grama and Sabrina Islam Rahman. Join us every first and third Thursday of the month when new episodes can be found wherever you listen. Subscribe so you won't miss an episode. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler from the National Cancer Institute, and I look forward to sharing your stories here on Inside Cancer Careers. If you have questions about cancer or comments about this podcast, email us at nci.info@nih.gov or call us at 800-422-6237. And please be sure to mention Inside Cancer Careers in your query. We are a production of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. Thanks for listening.